My name is Rachel Miller. I am 28 years old, and for most of my life, I was not a daughter but an institution, a reliable service, a quiet machine that turned exhaustion into money. In my family, affection was a performance and I was the stage it played on. They used to call me the responsible one. My mother said it with pride in public, but behind closed doors it became a we*p*n. Responsibility meant surrender. It meant that when the bills came, they were mine. When the car broke down, it was my problem. When my sister Emily wanted something she couldn't afford, it was my duty to make sure she never had to feel poor. It started small birthday gifts that doubled as household repairs, temporary loans that were never mentioned again. My parents said they couldn't afford both children at once. They said it with a laugh, but the math was real enough. There was always one golden child, and it was never me. That spring, Emily went to Mexico with friends. I stayed behind, working weekends to pay the mortgage I didn't live under. When they came home, tanned and rested, they found the house unchanged. But they didn't see how something in me had already eroded. I had been sending them $800 every month since I was 20. It was supposed to be a bridge until Dad's job stabilized. It became a leash. I paid the mortgage, covered renovations, bought him a used Honda, and filled the house with furniture. Every payday, I transferred pieces of my freedom into their comfort. My name was on every receipt, every invoice, but never on the list of people worth thanking. Emily dropped out of college to chase an online career that never began. When she failed, my mother sighed about how creative people take longer to find their way. I paid her rent, bought her a new laptop when she spilled wine on the old one, covered overdrafts she called accidents. Each rescue was supposed to earn affection, but it only bought contempt. Gratitude was an emotion they had reserved for someone else, themselves. Every visit felt like an audit. Why are you so tired? Why can't you come down more often? It must be nice living on your own and not worrying about family. They said it like a joke, but I could hear the resentment underneath. I had become the villain who paid their bills, the silent benefactor who was never generous enough. There was always a new emergency. A broken washing machine, a dental procedure, Emily's networking trip. I didn't even ask what that meant anymore. My father texted me a photo of the old living room set with the caption, "Falling apart again." It wasn't a request, not even a hint. It was an instruction. I sent money the same way people breathe, unconsciously and without reward. When I finally tried to slow down, my mother cried. "We're barely holding it together," she said. "Do you want us to lose the house?" That house, the one I had practically purchased, became their shield. It was never mine to rest in, only to sustain. I'd sit in my apartment, eating soup from a can, while my parents sent me photos of new curtains and Emily's freshly painted bedroom. They called it our little project. I called it my slow disappearance. People talk about manipulation like it's something loud. It's not. It's quiet. It's the sigh on the phone when you hesitate. It's the silence that follows when you say no. It's your mother saying, "We don't ask for much," right after you've given everything. The years blurred. My 20s passed in a fog of deposits and apologies. I never had the energy to travel, never saved for a down payment, never bought myself anything beyond the necessities. Every financial choice began with their names, not mine. When coworkers talked about vacations or plans for the future, I smiled and changed the subject. I had no future, only obligations dressed as love. The worst part was how normal it felt. They trained me to believe that giving was proof of belonging, that self-sacrifice was a virtue. Family helps family, my mother would remind me, but what she meant was, "You help us, and we'll decide when it's enough." It never was. On the rare occasions I visited, they treated me like a guest worker. Emily would boast about her latest content partnership, while my parents praised her courage to follow her dreams. My contributions were invisible. Money didn't count as love, they said. But without it, their love vanished entirely. I still remember one Christmas. Emily had forgotten to buy gifts for everyone. So my mother handed her the ones I'd brought and said, "Why don't you give these out, sweetheart?" I stood there, smiling like an idiot, while Emily passed out the presents I'd paid for, and everyone thanked her. I drove home that night through snow, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. That was the moment I realized that in our family, gratitude was inherited, not earned. There were times I tried to set boundaries. Once, I told my father I couldn't cover the property taxes that year. He hung up without a word. 2 days later, Emily texted, "You know they're disappointed in you, right?" Disappointed. As if I had broken a promise I never made. As if survival required my consent. I used to imagine that one day they'd recognize the cost of what I'd given. That maybe, if I just endured a little longer, they'd see me as more than a wallet. But endurance doesn't earn empathy. It breeds expectation. By the time I turned 27, the pattern was unbreakable. I was working overtime, juggling bills that weren't mine, and pretending everything was fine. When I missed a family dinner because I couldn't afford the flight, Emily posted photos of their meal online. Laughing, smiling, tagging it, "Family Night Red Heart." I wasn't even mentioned. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the last decade of my life like evidence in a trial I hadn't realized I was losing. Every text, every transaction, every sacrifice pointed to the same truth. I had mistaken exploitation for devotion. I was raised to believe that family meant giving without expecting anything back. But I learned too late that love without reciprocity is just servitude in disguise. And I was tired. Tired of being thanked with silence. Tired of watching Emily live like a daughter while I lived like a donor. Tired of financing their comfort while my own life stayed on pause. I didn't know it yet, but that exhaustion was the beginning of something new, the slow, deliberate death of obedience. On my birthday, I tried to make it small. A quiet dinner. A place with soft lights and a menu I'd studied all week so I wouldn't overspend. I told myself this year would be different. No surprise emergencies, no last minute "could you just cover?" Messages buzzing my phone while the server hovered with a smile like a countdown. I wore the dress I keep for interviews and funerals. I wanted to feel like a person who made choices. The first choice vanished with the appetizer. Mom arrived late, laughing, already telling a story about a neighbor's dog. Dad waved the server over before I sat down and ordered the special because we deserve a treat. Emily took photos of the table, angling the candles to flatter her face. When the check came, it traveled a familiar migration. Server's hand, quick glance at my mother, slower glance at me. I didn't pick it up right away. The silence gathered like rain. "Ratch," Mom finally said. "You know your father left his wallet at home." Practiced line. A retired magician still reaching for the same trick. Paid. "Happy birthday" to me. The tip was generous, like I was trying to convince myself I still had power somewhere. Back at my apartment, the tiredness felt different. Not like a weight, but like a bruise that had learned to speak. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up 11 years of bank statements. It was a decision made the way windows shatter. Suddenly, after pressure you pretend not to notice. I counted. Rent transfers labeled temporary. Mortgage payments set to autopay after Dad forgot twice. Renovations. The roof, the water heater, the flooring. Furniture. That car. 2 computers for Emily. Then a third because the second wasn't fast enough for editing. Overdraft coverage again and again, like rescuing a child who never once looks up to see who pulled them from the water. Flights for holidays they canceled because things came up. Groceries lined up in tidy rows of transactions. Therapy sessions my mother called optional maintenance before asking me to book them anyway. I made folders: mortgage, repairs, vehicles, sister, medical, groceries, gifts. I dragged digital receipts with a precision I'd never offered myself. Color-coded labels bloomed across my screen. My life translating into categories I could finally hold without flinching. The number I reached kept changing as I found more, as the quiet theft of a decade revealed itself line by line. It landed with a finality that made me set my hands flat on the table, steadying myself against the floor. Almost $120,000. People say money isn't everything. That's true. But it is something. It is time turned into heat. It is the hours you will never get back. It is the grind of mornings you can't forget. It is birthdays paid for by the person being celebrated, and then erased by a thank you that never arrives. I printed what mattered. I printed too much. The stack grew. I moved it to the couch. Then the floor. I highlighted names and dates, wrote notes in the margins. Asked on a Wednesday, threatened by Friday. We'll pay you back. Never did. Emily's rent, 3 months straight. The ink bled where my hand pressed too hard. I didn't notice until later. Something strange happened as I worked. The narrative I had been rehearsing my entire adult life began to unspool. I wasn't a good daughter fighting to keep a family afloat. I was a creditor disguised as a child. I was the emergency fund that made irresponsibility a sustainable lifestyle. I was the ghostwriter of their comfort. At 2 a.m, my phone lit with Emily's message. You left so early tonight. LOL. Mom got a cake after you left. Too bad you missed it. A photo came next. Frosting, candles, their 3 faces in my absence. I stared until the screen dimmed itself in self-defense. Then I turned the phone over and let the room go dark around that last small glow. The next day I called a lawyer. I expected the call to feel like betrayal. Felt like air. We met in an office with quiet carpet and a window that overlooked a parking lot where lives went in and out, unaware of my crisis becoming math. Show me, she said. I did. I watched her read. I watched her not look surprised. By law, she explained, I owned what I bought. Not emotionally, legally. The refrigerator, the stove, the washing machine, the smart TV everyone praised for its picture. The couch, the bed frames, the dining table I had never been invited to choose. The car titled in my name that Dad called ours. The laptop gifted to Emily with repayment someday. The vacuum, the microwave, the rug. It all traced back to me. She explained receipts with the softness of a doctor naming an illness you've had for years without treatment. If it's yours, she said. And if they disagree, your documentation stands. You've been thorough. Thorough. That word has always been my downfall and my defense. When I left the office, the air outside tasted different. Not sweet. Not triumphant. Just clean. Like stepping out of a loud room into a hallway where sound finally remembers how to be distance. I walked for a while with my hands in my coat pockets and the verdict marching beside me like a very quiet friend. On the bus home I made lists, the small kind that pretend to be errands but are actually acts of war. This time none of it felt like punishment. Punishment is what you do to someone. This was what I had already done to myself, stopping. I wrote a sentence at the top of a page. Remaining in this role is betrayal. Of me. I underlined it until the paper thinned. At home, I opened my closet and found the suitcase I only ever used to visit them. I set it on the bed and left it open. I didn't pack. I just needed to see possibility with a zipper on it. That evening, Mom called. Her voice was cheerful, elastic, stretching to cover everything it didn't want to touch. Your father thinks we should redo the kitchen cabinets, she said. It would raise the value of the house. Can you help us get started? We'll pay you back when the tax return hits. I listened to the lie we were all addicted to. Then I said a word I almost never use with her. No. Silence. Then the little gasp, the one that always used to undo me. Rachel, that's not how family works. I looked at the stacks of paper around me. The proof of how family had worked. Maybe it is, and maybe I'm not family anymore, I said. Maybe I'm just the bank that finally closed. She hung up. No slam. Just a quiet click like a door you lock because habit tells you to. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I made tea and stood by the window while the kettle sang about how everything ends. The awakening wasn't fireworks. It was a ledger. It was a calendar. It was the discovery that the person I kept betraying was the only person I had to live with for the rest of my life. I sat down and wrote one more list, the last of that night. Non-negotiables. I wrote, no more loans. No more autopays. No more emergencies that were just poor planning and my fear. I drew a small box at the bottom of the page and wrote a single word inside it, me. Like I was finally granting someone I loved a room of her own. When I closed the notebook, the room fell silent in a way that felt like mercy. The paperwork waited. The plan had already beg asterisk n. I understood, at last, that freedom doesn't always feel good at the start. Sometimes it just feels accurate. Freedom doesn't arrive with trumpets. It comes in small, domestic gestures, canceling an automatic transfer, deleting a saved password, opening a drawer and realizing you no longer owe its contents to anyone. After the call with my mother, the silence in my apartment felt sharper. I didn't play music. I didn't turn on the lights. I just walked from room to room, touching things that were truly mine. The chipped mug, the second-hand bookshelf, the plant that kept growing no matter how little sunlight it received. It wasn't beauty, it was ownership. And for the first time, that was enough. For years, I had dreamed of Portland, Oregon. The idea had lived quietly in me like a seed that never saw rain. I wanted mountains and rain-soaked mornings, the smell of earth instead of air conditioning. I used to save photos of apartments with brick walls and high windows, imagining coffee and solitude. Felt like fantasy then. Now it felt like a plan with coordinates. I asked for remote status at work. My supervisor looked surprised, then relieved, as if she'd been waiting for me to choose myself. The request was approved in 24 hours. That night I began searching for an apartment, one bedroom, high floor, near a park, somewhere with space for breathing and silence that belonged to no one else. For the next 2 weeks, I moved through my life as though rehearsing an escape I'd already committed to. Every morning before work, I cleaned a drawer. Every evening I packed a box. Receipts, legal papers, warranties, all labeled and dated. I even photographed the furniture I'd purchased for my parents' house. Each image timestamped, each one proof. My lawyer advised it. Document everything, she said. I did, with the devotion of a person archiving her own erasure. When the lease for my new apartment came through, I didn't tell anyone. I bought the ticket quietly, one way. The departure date fell on the same week my parents and Emily were leaving for Italy. The symmetry was too perfect to ignore. They called it their once-in-a-lifetime trip. I called it a window of opportunity. The days before their flight were filled with their usual requests. Could you move some money into the account, just until we get back? Can you double-check the insurance payment? I said yes to everything, my voice calm, my tone obedient. Let them believe the world was still stable. Let them board the plane without suspicion. The night before they left, my mother called. Her voice was soft, almost tender. You know, honey, we're lucky to have you. Emily says you're always thinking ahead. It was the kind of praise that used to warm me for weeks. Now it felt like a sedative she'd perfected. I thanked her. I told her to enjoy the trip. She said, "We'll bring you something nice from Rome." I smiled at the ceiling. The only thing I wanted from them was absence. When their flight finally took off, I felt something I hadn't in years. Stillness. It wasn't peace yet, but it was silence with potential. I made a single phone call to the moving company my lawyer had recommended. They arrived at dawn. 3 men in gray uniforms, polite, professional, indifferent to the morality of what they were about to do. I handed them the list and the keys. "Take everything marked with a red sticker," I said. "Leave the rest." It was a long list. The refrigerator went first, humming one last time before they unplugged it. Then the stove, the washing machine, the television. The couch Emily claimed as her spot. The dining table that hosted a decade of unpaid gratitude. The computer I'd bought for her video editing. Even the rugs, they'd been mine too. Piece by piece, the house emptied of its illusions. The sound of furniture being moved echoed through the empty rooms like an exorcism. Each thud was a heartbeat leaving the body of a lie. I didn't feel guilty. I felt mathematical. By noon, the truck was full. The driver handed me the clipboard, his pen hovering above the signature line. "All yours?" he asked. "All mine," I said. He nodded. "Good for you." I watched them drive away until the truck disappeared at the corner. What remained was quiet, unnatural, almost holy. I walked back inside. The house looked like an abandoned stage after the play has closed. Wallpaper too bright, air heavy with what used to be voices. I left only one thing on the kitchen table. A sealed envelope. Inside it, I placed copies of every receipt, photos of every object, and a letter written in the same calm tone I used when sending them money. It began. For 11 years I helped build this home. Every wall, every appliance, every comfort you've enjoyed carries my fingerprints. You told me family meant giving without expecting anything back. I believed you. I gave until I disappeared. This isn't revenge. It's restoration. Everything I purchased with my own labor now returns to me. When you come home, you'll find absence instead of destruction. Absence is fair. It's the balance you taught me to ignore. I signed my name and sealed the envelope. Before I left, I walked through each room one last time. My father's study, where he'd kept framed photos of Emily's graduation but none of mine. The living room where I'd sat invisible while they toasted her achievements. The kitchen always smelling of something borrowed. Each room had once demanded something from me. Now it was silent, stripped, clean. I turned off the lights, closed the door, slid the key under the mat. Driving away, I didn't look back. I had watched that house from my car window too many times before, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. This time, I didn't need it. The highway stretched ahead like a clean ledger. Every mile was subtraction of guilt, of expectation, of debt. My phone buzzed once with a notification. The movers had delivered everything to the storage unit in Portland. Proof of completion. I deleted the message after reading it. The next morning, I arrived in Oregon. The air was damp and sharp with rain. My apartment smelled faintly of paint and promise. I unpacked a few things. My own dishes, my own bed linens, a lamp that had followed me through every move but never really belonged anywhere until now. When night came, I sat on the floor with a cup of tea and no sound but rain tapping against the window. It was so quiet that I could hear my own breathing, slow and deliberate, like a language I'd forgotten. Somewhere in Italy, my family was sipping wine, posting photos, laughing under bright skies. They didn't know yet, but they would. And when they walked into that hollow house, what they'd find would not be theft. It would be the echo of justice. Everything gone, but nothing stolen. Everything mine finally returned. The envelope on the table would explain the rest, and maybe, for the first time, they'd understand the cost of what they'd taken. As for me, I didn't need their understanding anymore. Only distance. Only air. That night I slept deeply, dreamless, like someone who had at last paid every debt she owed, including the one to herself. When they returned from Italy, I was already 2 states away, sitting on my new balcony with a mug of coffee that tasted like rain and silence. My phone buzzed for hours that morning. Calls, messages, the rising panic of discovery in real time. I didn't answer. I watched the clouds slide over the mountains instead, slow and deliberate, like they were teaching me a new rhythm. Mom called first. Her voice on the voicemail was brittle, an instrument gone out of tune. "Rachel, I don't understand what's happened. The house, everything's gone. Please call us." Dad's message came next, quieter but sharper. "You've made a terrible mistake. We could have talked about this." Then Emily. She didn't leave a voicemail. She sent pictures. Photos of empty rooms, captions typed in frantic bursts. "You're insane. You ruined everything." Mom's crying. "How could you do this?" I turned the phone face down on the table and let their words hum against the wood until the battery died. They tried to take legal action. I expected that. My lawyer expected it too. Within a week, she sent me an email. All claims dismissed. Receipts verified. Case closed. The phrase looked almost poetic on the screen. Every dollar, every transfer, every polite theft I'd endured had transformed into evidence, and now into proof of ownership. When I told my lawyer thank you, she said, "You earned this, Rachel. Don't call it revenge. Call it accounting." Still, I wasn't free yet. Freedom has a silence you have to grow into. At first, the quiet of my apartment felt unnatural. I'd wake up early, expecting my phone to vibrate with requests. The absence of need was its own kind of phantom. I catch myself opening banking apps just to make sure no one had slipped through the cracks. No one had. In Portland, I started over carefully, as if learning to walk again. I bought a second-hand bike. I joined a local art class, something I hadn't done since college. The teacher, a man in his 60s with paint always on his sleeves, asked us to draw something we'd lost and then something we'd gained. I drew the same thing twice, a house, once filled, once empty. On weekends, I wandered through farmers' markets, tasting fruit I didn't have to share. I learned how to sit in restaurants alone without apology. I learned that money, when it stays with you, grows into options instead of obligations. Took a month before the guilt began to fade. Not all of it. Some kinds of guilt are stitched into the muscle, but enough that I could breathe without hearing their voices. When I walked home from the park one afternoon, the air smelled like wet cedar and smoke from nearby chimneys. For a moment, I caught myself smiling, unforced, unobserved. Felt foreign, felt like mine. But the past never goes quietly. One night, near the end of summer, my phone rang again. Emily. I stared at her name glowing on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. Rachel. Her voice was small, unfamiliar. Can we talk? I didn't answer right away. She filled the silence with breath. They're not doing well. Mom cries all the time. Dad says you humiliated him. I don't even know what's going to happen to the house now. I looked around my apartment. The small plants thriving on the windowsill, the stack of unpaid bills that were only mine, the quiet hum of a fridge no one could take from me. Emily, I said slowly, you mean the house I paid for? She hesitated. That's not the point. It's exactly the point, I said. Her breath hitched. You didn't have to go that far. You could have just told us how you felt. I did, I said. Every time I said I was tired. Every time I hesitated before sending money. You heard me, you just preferred silence. She started to cry. The sound was messy, real. I didn't know how bad it was. I thought you liked helping. You always acted like it didn't bother you. That's the problem, I said softly. You mistook endurance for consent. We stayed on the line a moment longer, neither of us knowing how to bridge what was left. Finally, she whispered, Mom misses you. I'm sure she does, I said. So does the mortgage. After the call, I sat on the floor and let the quiet return. It didn't feel heavy anymore. Felt earned. Months passed. The text slowed, then stopped. My parents sold the house. Emily moved back in with them briefly before finding her own apartment. Occasionally, I'd see a photo of them online, smiling, thinner, smaller somehow. They looked like people learning the shape of consequence. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. It looks like subtraction. I built a new rhythm. Morning coffee on the balcony. Work that no longer felt like obligation. Friends who didn't ask for proof of loyalty in dollars. On Fridays, I'd walk to the bookstore near the corner, buy a secondhand novel and read it cover to cover by Sunday. Small rituals, private and ordinary, the kind of life that once felt unreachable. One rainy evening, as the city lights bled into the pavement, I found myself thinking of my family again. Not with anger this time, but with a strange clarity. I realized they hadn't really lost me. They'd lost the version of me that tolerated everything. The provider, the apologist, the daughter who measured love by the size of her sacrifices. That Rachel no longer existed. The next morning I walked to the park. The air was cold and clean, the kind that makes you feel newly made. Children were playing by the fountain, and a dog chased after a stick with impossible joy. For a moment, I thought about calling my mother, just to say I was okay. But then I remembered. Being okay was something she'd never believed I deserved unless I earned it for someone else. So I kept walking. That night, I opened my journal, the one I'd carried since leaving. I turned to a blank page and wrote it wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Then I added they took what I offered. I took back what was mine. I closed the book, set it on the nightstand, and stared at the ceiling. The room was silent except for the sound of rain, steady and forgiving. Sometimes I still wonder if they'll ever understand why I did it. Maybe one day they'll look through those receipts and see what I saw. Not greed, not malice, but the record of a woman trying to buy her way into love. Now I know better. Love that must be purchased is never real. And belonging that costs your self-respect isn't belonging. It's captivity. I chose freedom instead. Was I wrong? Would you have endured it longer, called it loyalty, kept paying for affection that never came? I can't answer for you. I can only tell you that when I finally stopped funding my family's comfort, I discovered the quiet luxury of my own. And that silence, steady, sovereign, and mine, was worth every dollar I ever lost.